Well, thank you very much, Mr Howarth, and thank you to everyone who's contributed to the debate. And can I congratulate the honourable gentleman, the member for Mid-Worcestershire, on securing this important debate, and indeed everyone who's contributed. I think some excellent points have been made by honourable members from Downpatrick, Wells, Ayr, Carrick and Cumnock, St Austell and Newquay, Edinburgh North and Leith, South East Cornwall and Taunton, and of course by the honourable gentleman on behalf of the SNP, the member for West Dunbartonshire. I think it says something about the significant ramifications of Brexit that we are debating its impact on tourism, because normally one wouldn't think that a constitutional referendum would be something that would lead us on to having to debate the future of the UK tourism industry. So it's quite a surprise, really, that we've come to this, but it does show how important the Brexit vote is to the future of our tourism industry. And as people have pointed out, there has actually been a short-term boost to the tourist industry since the Brexit referendum. Despite the weather over the last few months, Mr Howard, tourism in the UK, visitor numbers have gone up. The number of visitors from outside the UK has risen since June the 23rd. This July saw a 1% increase compared to the same last year. The number of staycations, that people have pointed out, visitors from inside the UK has also risen since June. And that's very important. As honourable members have said, this is a very important industry. It contributes to 9% of the UK's employment. But of course, the principal reason for that increase in tourist numbers in recent months is the weakness of the pound, which has been caused both by the impact of the Brexit vote itself, but also, I'm afraid, by the government's mishandling of the aftermath of the Brexit vote. With each faltering step, Mr Howarth, the government's handling of Brexit, the pound has devalued further. And yesterday, its value against the US dollar dropped to below $1.23. In fact, UK visitors at the moment going to Europe on holiday. I had a colleague, one of our colleagues who was in Venice recently, taking a very hard-earned short break away from his constituency, told me that he was getting a parity in exchanging the pound for the euro whilst he was in Venice. Now, I will in a moment. What isn't clear, and perhaps he could clear this up for me, what isn't clear, is this what the government wants? A weaker pound? And perhaps he'll tell me.
I thank the Shadow Minister for giving way. And if we want to talk about how things went over summer, I must say it was a real spectacle to be observed in his own party. What I was actually going to perhaps try to be slightly more positive and constructive is that actually one of the reasons why people see places like Torbay as a great place to come is because we are a safe and welcoming country, with some of the issues that do not exist in other nations.
Well, yes, and I'll come on to that. But, as interventions go, can I say to him, argument week, change the subject, is not always the most powerful way to make your point, because we're talking about tourism here in the industry. And I praise Torbay. I spent many happy weeks in Torbay as a young child, in fact, as a young man as well, and enjoyed happy holidays there. It's a wonderful destination. But my question is this: is the new weak pound, as I said, trading in recent days at parity with the euro, now the government's economic policy? And is the government, the Conservative government, following Brexit, now the party of devolution? Surely not, because I thought that stable, sound money, a strong, stable pound with a discipline that brings on productivity was one of the central principles of a Conservative government. But apparently not, because honourable members will have heard, because I'm sure they were all there at Scottish Questions today, the Scottish Secretary bragging about how record numbers had come to this year's Edinburgh Festival as a result of being attracted by the weak pound to the Edinburgh Festival in Scotland. So perhaps the Minister at the end of the debate can confirm that this new weak pound policy is government policy when she responds to the debate. And of course, the effect on the pound is not the only impact of Brexit. Until the government decides how freedom of movement is going to be reformed when we leave the EU, and how and whether these measures, he's free to intervene again if he wants to, instead of chuntering on from a sedentary position, and how and whether these measures will affect tourist entry to the UK. Britain's accessibility as a tourist destination carries a lingering question mark, given that 73% of foreign visitors to the UK in 2015 were from Europe. Any uncertainty of this kind unaddressed is extremely unhelpful. And I think that point has been made, perhaps not in the way I've made it, but by honourable members opposite. And perhaps another concerning issue that has been mentioned too is the importance of EU workers to the tourism sector. As we mentioned previously, tourism-related industries account for 9% of UK employment, but of these, there's quite a high proportion of non-UK citizens, and that, as has been pointed out in the debate, is particularly true of London. And APTA and Deloitte published a report prior to the referendum outlining the potential consequences of Brexit on tourism, and it stated that limits to the sector's ability to employ those from outside the UK could lead to real difficulties in filling roles, and found that, and I quote in a moment, restrictions on employing EU nationals might thus exacerbate existing skills shortages. Ultimately, this could have a detrimental effect on the sector's ability to serve consumers at the standard they expect. I'll give way to Honourable Gentleman.
I'm going to agree with the Shadow Minister in saying that one of the advantages of the EU migrant workforce has been actually it's provided the range of linguistic skills in a lot of our hotels and conference venues. And if we're going to lose that, we could really do with some better language training in our schools to replace it.
Well, I hope we aren't going to lose it, actually. I think we can have both. And that ought to be our aim, really, in going forward, because I don't think he intended by his intervention saying in any way that those people should be sent home and that we should, over a period of time, train their replacements. Of course we should be improving language skills in our schools. Of course we should be getting more UK citizens to fill jobs in the tourism industry. But it's equally important that we should be clear that we're not suggesting that we don't welcome that diversity within our tourist industry in this country. And I'm afraid that one of the problems is that some of the messaging from the government post-Brexit is damaging potentially to Britain's blue-chip brand. Now, at the Conservative Party conference, we saw the Home Secretary seriously announce, or at least headlines seriously announcing, a very misguided policy of publicly listing foreign workers. Now, that's subsequently been clumsily withdrawn from by the government, but actually we've seen this all before. I've seen this movie many times over. Ministers at Conservative Party conference announcing right-wing policies at the conference that deliver plenty of claps in the conference hall and tabloid headlines for the politician at the Conservative Party conference, but then inevitably they row back from it in subsequent days from that extreme position. But the problem is their message is heard, Mr. Howard. And not just in Britain, it's heard overseas as well. I'm afraid that xenophobic sentiment at the service of inflamed rhetoric to generate a lurid headline to keep the tabloid editors happy and send out a dog whistle to the right is an ugly thing. And I'd say shame on the Home Secretary for risking Britain's reputation abroad for hospitality and tolerance for a few moments of glory on the front pages of the red tops. This sort of behaviour not only damages Britain's brand abroad, it also ultimately shortchanges the British public, because in the long run, British tourism won't thrive on the attractiveness necessary of our weather, but it will thrive on the attractiveness of our welcome. And it won't thrive because Britain's cheap, because we have a weak pound, but it will thrive because Britain's rich in culture, in heritage, and in hospitality. And British tourism won't flourish by shrinking to Little England slogans, but by confidently projecting a greater Britain, with a warm and open welcome to visitors to all of its parts, to Wales, to Northern Ireland, to Scotland and England, and often through the gateway of one of the world's most diverse cities in London. So, coming from Cardiff, before I finish, I should mention the Champions League final will take place there next year, and we're hoping the road to Cardiff will lead to many visitors coming from overseas. But UK tourism really does need greater clarity from the government on Brexit and clearer messaging that we're open and welcoming to the world, that we want people from all across the world to come here to enjoy our heritage, our countryside, our modern cities, sometimes even to enjoy the weather, but most of all to feel that they're welcoming. And devaluing the pound may work to the tourism sector's advantage for now, but devaluing our brand as a country will do the opposite. And if it continues, it'll cause lasting damage to our reputation and to our vital tourism industry.